collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up on this week's programme, the Interior Minister tells us about plans to make sure our housing is up to standard.
The new bill provides for the establishment of mandatory regular inspections for all existing buildings.
There are plans to roll out tests for prostate cancer across the population.
Prostate cancer is something that is very common as we get older. That's why it's very important that we have those shared decision-making discussions with our family physician, depending on your risk factors, depending on your personal preferences.
And a planetarium has opened on the island.
We have a telescope and a solar scope, an observation center actually, where we can see the stars.
Back in February, the huge earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria was also felt in Cyprus, and it brought up questions about the quality of the housing stock on the island. Joining us on this week's programme is our Interior Minister, Konstantinos Ioannou, because they've got plans afoot, certainly for refugee housing, which has been left, I think, over the years to disintegrate, and they're going to build new housing. But what about the rest of the homes that we have in Cyprus, and are they up to scratch? Konstantinos, thank you very much for joining me. So all those points I've put is a huge topic, of course, because we do have a lot of houses in Cyprus, but an awful lot of them are not up to scratch, are they?
Apparently not. I mean, I think this is an issue that faces each country in the EU faces the same issue, because planning regulations with regards to earthquakes were implemented in the last 20 to 30 years in most countries. So buildings that were built before that, and in some European cities and in Cyprus, we have buildings that have been built 100 years ago, 80 years ago. They obviously will have some issues. In any case, the last time that our building regulations were reviewed was 2012. So, and the first time to be, just to inform your viewers that it was mandatory for buildings to be built bearing in mind an earthquakes to be earthquake resilient was done in the mid-90s. So definitely before the mid-90s, any building that was built before the mid-90s, it wasn't mandatory to be earthquake resilient. That doesn't mean that they were built so, but we have to make sure that they are earthquake resilient. In order to do that, we just recently prepared a new bill that right now it's about to be submitted in Parliament, which provides, first of all, for the assignment of more competence and power to building authorities, because one of the issues we have is that with the current bill, the building authorities are not, it takes time for them to take appropriate actions. With this bill, that will increase their power and their competencies in order to intervene sooner than later. But more importantly, the new bill provides for the establishment of mandatory regular inspections for all existing buildings. Obviously, these inspections will vary according to the use, the age of the building, and will definitely be conducted by engineers approved by the Scientific and Technical Chamber. So hopefully, when the new bill is passed, it will address all these issues with regards to buildings built before the 1990s.
That's great news, because I spoke to ETEC about this when we had those collapsing balconies at the end of last year.
Yeah.
We do have a lot of housing stock, as I said, that has never been properly maintained. Now, who is responsible for maintaining it? I mean, I own my own house. It's up to me, surely, to keep it in a safe condition for me and my family, but that's particularly, I would suggest, more important if I'm planning to rent it out to other people.
Sure. It goes both ways. I mean, the owner should maintain the buildings. If it's a building wholly owned by somebody, then usually he or she takes care of the building because it's his own property. The problem intensifies in block of flats, where you have a block of flats of 10, 12, 15 flats. Each is owned by a separate person, and there they should agree on their common expenses to maintain the building. Unfortunately, with the current legislation, although it's mandatory, it cannot be enforced. So again, another piece of legislation, another bill that we prepared and it's about to be submitted to Parliament has to do with common ownership buildings, that is flats, block of flats or any other building that is shared by more than one owner, and it specifies their responsibility to maintain the building in a proper condition.
But what happens if somebody says, I'm not going to pay those common expenses? There isn't anything at the moment that can be done about that.
At the moment, no. But with the new bill, it will be mandatory for each and everyone to contribute. So if you own an apartment, and I think it happens to anybody that owns a flat in a building, you may be willing to go ahead with the estimate and your fair share of the estimate expenditure to repair damages in the building. If 1 out of 10 refuses, then you cannot go ahead. With the new bill, we're going to sort out these differences. And there's going to be a mechanism embedded within the bill that will make it more or less mandatory when a decision is been made for each and everyone to contribute. That is done, for example, in the UK.
Okay, but how are you going to enforce that?
There's going to be a bill.
Yes, but I still say that... Sorry, are you going to take me to court if I don't pay my common expenses?
Of course. Right now, supposedly you can't take somebody in court if they don't pay their common expenses, but the way the bill is structured is close to impossible. With the new bill, each and everyone should contribute. If one refuses, the committee that manages the common expenses can take he or she to court.
Right, can we come on to the refugee housing, because that's turned out to be quite a problem, hasn't it? You're going to have to knock quite a few of those down with this Thesos scheme, I Build. Tell me a bit more about that, if you will, Konstantinos.
Basically, as most people are aware of, these buildings were built right after the invasion, and through the years there were some structural problems with these buildings. Some of them weren't built with the right equipment or cement or whatever it took to build them at the time. So the Ministry of Interior did a survey of all those buildings, which was completed in 2020, and we found out that at least for some of them, 43 for example, it didn't make any financial sense to repair them. They were damaged at a point beyond any financially feasible repair. So having in mind that study that was done, we decided to see the condition as it is right now in 2023 of these buildings, and whenever it was deemed that the building should be torn down, fine, and we'll pay for it for 90%, we'll reimburse or will pay the owners 90% of the worth of a new apartment. So basically the owners can build a new apartment in land found adjacent or close or within the same refugee camp, the same area. So we provide for the land, we provide for the architect, and we pay basically 90% of the cost to build a new block of flats. So right now refugees whose building is found to be needs to be demolished, either immediately or within the next 2 years, we have a scheme whereby we give the land, we pay for each one a certain amount, which covers for 90% of the total cost. So their contribution will be maximum 10%. If somebody is not willing to participate in this scheme, then they take the money given for a new flat, plus the money, their equivalent amount of money for the land, and they can get their money and go find something else or buy somewhere else. They don't need to participate as such.
Who is going to be responsible for maintaining those buildings when they move in?
Themselves. Up to now it was up to the state, and the reason why there is such bad condition mainly because they relied on the state. The state wasn't in a condition to maintain them yearly or whenever it was needed, because we're talking about, under this scheme, 3,500 flats. So it was close to impossible to maintain them. and they weren't built initially as they should have been at the time, apparently. That's why they face these problems right now.
Right, so the new owners will be responsible, as all other property owners, for maintaining their buildings.
Yes, this scheme, one of the provisions is that we give you the money, we give you the land, we give you the expert, the architect to build it. You decide who's going to build it, because they're going to get offers from contractors. They're going to decide who's going to build it. We're going to guide them through this procedure, but then maintaining it won't be the responsibility of the state as it has been so far, but it's going to be their responsibility, as it happens with every other individual owner. Because bear in mind, these people, the refugees, the majority of them, they already got titles. Deeds for their apartments, so basically it belongs to them. It was just an agreement that the state so far would have maintained them, despite the fact that they are not owned by the state anymore.
So a lot of them are going to get, let's say, €120,000 apartment by paying just 12.
No, they're going to get more than that. I think at least in Nicosia, to get a one-bedroom flat, you need 130, 140, including VAT. For one-bedroom flat, they have to contribute 10,000. For two-bedroom flat, they have to contribute 20,000, and a three-bedroom, they have to contribute 25,000 euros.
So they're getting a pretty good deal. Now, what about other homeowners who live in run-down flats, but they're not actually classed as refugees? Is the government able to do anything at all to help them?
No.
Seems a bit unfair, Konstantinos.
No, it's not unfair, because these flats were given to refugees as a compensation, as a way, because they didn't have an alternative housing option. And we feel that we are morally obliged to repay them because of the condition of the flats. Bear in mind, these title deeds were given to them 10, 12 years ago, not when they were built. In the meantime, the condition of those flats were not good.
Yes, but they had the title deeds, and then they didn't make any repairs anyway, so you're giving them another one.
No, they have the title deeds, but the state was still responsible. It was agreed that the state was still responsible to maintain them.
All right, but then we come, as I said, to other people who are not classed as refugees, who are struggling to even buy a house or a home or a flat or anything, and they get no assistance whatsoever because...
No, they do get assistance. I mean, as a state, we have various schemes now to subsidize housing, not for urban areas right now, only for inner city Nicosia, but for rural areas up in the mountains or across the Green Line. We have 3 different schemes that we subsidize up to 45,000 euros per unit. So there are schemes available. In the meantime, and it was a promise given by the current president during the election campaign, we are working towards a housing solution for everybody, and hopefully we'll be in a position to announce our plan by September.
Can I ask you what plans you have, and the other authorities dealing with this, in terms of using brownfield sites? Every town in Cyprus has old housing stock that probably should be knocked down, and wouldn't it be better to build there than putting new properties out in greenfield sites, particularly thinking that if it's a vulnerable family, somebody who's struggling, they probably can't afford to travel into town to work?
Rosie, we are looking at all options. It doesn't mean, I didn't say that with our new housing scheme we're going to give permits or provide incentives for plots outside urban areas. We're looking into urban areas, we're looking at all possible options.
And long term, I mean, there's a lot of houses needed for the number of people. Young people in particular have been hit by all these high-rise luxury apartments that have gone up and pushed up prices because we've been encouraging investors to come in and bring highly paid people to work in their businesses who are quite happy to pay €1,000 a month or more for a flat. But most young Cypriots can't.
As I said, we understand, we know the problem, and we're working towards a solution for this problem. We inherited this problem, but we're working towards a solution for this problem. It's complicated. It involves the Ministry of Finance as well. In certain areas, activities were bound by EU legislation. So we're looking into all alternatives to come up with a comprehensive housing solution plan.
Well, we're all behind you, I'm pretty sure about that, Konstantinos, because it's terrible to me to see a lot of our housing stock that should be saved, and I'm talking about the old buildings that should be listed, just falling down because nobody cares. And that's another thing. Could we not make use of some of those ancient buildings that are part of the cultural heritage of our island?
We have a scheme that if a house or building is listed, then they give subsidies. If it's not listed, then it means that it's not of any particular architectural or any other kind of interest.
Oh no, I have to take you to task on that. If it's not listed, it's usually because the owners don't want to list it because they'll get a much better price if they knock it down and sell it to a developer.
Like yes, we need to get the permission of the owner as well, but sometimes if it's truly architectural, then they have to oblige by it. But allow me, because time is running out and I have another appointment, I'm already late, to give you the same response. We're looking to all possible options. We're looking to existing housing stock, if we can give incentives to maintain them, or within their facilities, outside their facilities. It's a complicated, it's a multifaceted plan. We have to look at different solutions and come up with a comprehensive, well-thought plan.
I'm sure you will manage to do that. Konstantinos, sorry to take up so much of your time. Many thanks for joining me.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's our Interior Minister, Konstantinos Ioannou.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
The Health Ministry announced recently that it will start screening for prostate cancer, which will be offered systematically to men through our National Health Service. Well, it's something I thought an awful lot of men of a certain age went through anyway because it's part of a blood test. It's much more simple than what ladies go through for their boobs being looked at for cancer. Joining us to tell us what it would involve and indeed how effective it might be is General Health Practitioner Yorgos Samoutis. George, this is something that I sort of, as I said, assumed most men after a certain age automatically did when they did maybe an annual blood test. So what's the difference of rolling it out across the population?
Yeah, we're talking about screening. Screening says making sure that you cover the whole of the population. But this is a controversial issue, screening for prostate cancer, due to concerns regarding over-detection and over-treatment. But what the guidelines actually tell us is that basically the American Cancer Society recommends that men aged 50 years who have an average risk of prostate cancer and they have a life expectancy of at least 10 years, then they can have a well-informed prostate cancer screening discussion with their GP. And whereas if you're African American or you have a family history of prostate cancer, then you should begin to discussing the screening at the age of 45. If you are a man at a very high risk, more than one persecuted relative at a young age, then you should begin discussing screening at the age of 40. So depending on your risk, the individual risk, then the recommendation from the American Cancer Society tell us to start screening at the ages of 40, high risk, 45, you're African American, you have a family history of prostate cancer, and the age of 50 for the average risk prostate cancer patient.
Well, I'm right, I think, in saying that actually the vast majority of men over a certain age, I thought it was older than 50, but certainly of a certain age, are very likely to have high PSA readings and what we would call prostate cancer. But most of them don't even need to have anything done about it, do they?
Exactly. This is why they need to have, let's say, a well-informed prostate cancer screening discussion with your GP, because you may run into over-detection and over-treatment. And that's why there you need to see your individual risk and then discuss with your family physician if you need it or not. And the other question, Rose, is that how often we need to do the screening. So in Cyprus, we tend to do it yearly. But again, depends on your risk. The American Urological Association recommendations tell us to screen every 2 years for those that they decide to go on screening.
It's a blood test. I mean, you give blood for other reasons, don't you? I mean, if you've got high cholesterol or whatever. So it's very simply asking the lab, isn't it, to look for something else as well?
Exactly. So this is a lab test. So if you do your health check and you need to do your blood test, then if you have depending on your risk, you can discuss this with your family physician and then include PSA into your screening test, into your blood test.
But you, George, I think automatically do this when men reach, 60?
Yeah, usually we start 50 in Cyprus if there's an average risk, and if there's a life expectancy of at least 10 years.
Right, so let's talk about that life expectancy, because the treatments vary tremendously, I think, according to how serious the cancer is, how well advanced it is, and as I said a few minutes ago, whether or not you do actually need to do anything about it and possibly have some very uncomfortable years ahead of you, or whether it's better just to let it sort of carry on, hopefully at that age, not increasing too much.
Yeah, that's why I said this is a discussion you need to do with your family physician, because depending on your risk and your personal wishes and your life expectancy, then you need to do that discussion. But as we all know, prostate cancer is something that is very common as we get older. So that's why it's very important that we have those shared decision-making discussion with our family physician, depending on your risk factors, depending on your personal preferences of your concerns and expectations and your life expectancy.
And what about the treatments that are currently being used? Because there are many different sorts and they don't all suit the same people, do they?
Yeah, exactly. We have, thankfully, we have a very good treatments available nowadays. So for treating prostate CA, and depending, of course, of the risk and of the cancer, then there's a lot of possibilities or options for patients. So like prostatectomy, like androgen deprivation therapy, like external beam radiotherapy, depending on the disease, of course, you have, and the extension of the disease. But another question is about the rectal examination, which is another sensitive issue. So if you have an abnormal PSA, maybe your physician will offer you to fill your prostate. And this is, again, something that needs to be discussed with your personal physician.
How good are men at talking about these things, George? Because in my experience, women are much more open when it comes to discussing their breasts and their mammograms and things like that. And men, especially as you mentioned, a rectal examination, they tend to be a little bit squeamish, don't they?
Exactly. That's why it's like a taboo issue for many. So that's what's important to inform our patients, and also it's an issue of a personal relationship that you develop and trust with your personal physician.
And men also tend to think, I think, it's the big C, and get quite frightened and worry as well that it'll affect their sexual performance.
Exactly, yes.
So what do you say to people who are thinking that way? Because as we've said several times already in this chat, it doesn't have to, does it?
Yeah, it doesn't have to, but if you have an average risk or you're a high risk, and then you can have an early diagnosis of a prostate CA, and you have a good life expectancy, then I think something that you need to consider of performing the test.
No, I'm not talking about the test, I'm talking about the treatments. I mean, there are several different treatments, and I know people who've found it very difficult, for example, toileting after having treatment, and that's made their life miserable. So you've got to weigh up the pros and the cons, haven't you?
Yeah, you're talking about the treatment of prostate CA. As I said, it could be radiotherapy like brachytherapy or radical prostatectomy or androgen deprivation therapy. Then, of course, you need to balance and you need to discuss it openly, the pros and cons. But we cannot give a general recommendation here.
No, I'm not asking for that. I guess that this is something that each person would have to talk about and find out what side effects there might be and make their decision based on that.
Exactly. And this is also has to do with shared decision-making approach, that the physician needs to discuss it openly with the patient and what are the pros and cons and what the patient's ideas, the concerns and expectations after the intervention, after the surgery or radiotherapy, whatever treatment is decided depending on the disease.
Okay, but you're thinking, I think, that this is a good idea that we introduce across-the-board screening across the male population of Cyprus so that any indication of prostate cancer is caught early enough to do something about it positively.
I think it's a good idea when it's done in a shared decision-making approach. And as discussed, so you have involved the patient in the discussion, and then you take together the decision of screen or not to screen. We have a lot of studies, of course, that are quite positive. In Finland, I remember a study from Finland that found that PSA screening decreased the incidence of advanced prostate cancer compared with no screening. Oh, there was a Gettable study, an RCT again, that found the benefit of prostate cancer screening compared favorably to other cancer screening programs. So I think it's a very good idea, but we need to do it in the under the umbrella of a patient-centered approach, giving the information to the patient, discussing the patient's ideas, concerns, expectations.
And to get that, of course, we need patients to come forward and be a little bit more open about things that they may prefer not to talk about. It's always a pleasure discussing these issues with you, George. Thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you so much, Rose.
That is George Samoutis. He's a general practitioner in our National Health Service, talking there about the upcoming rollout of screening for prostate cancer in Cyprus.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
A planetarium has just opened in Cyprus, and we're going to talk about what it has to offer to their CEO, Christos Triandafyllidis. Christos, I think this has been in the planning for quite some time, hasn't it? But finally, it's off the ground. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, that's correct, Rosie. Actually, the planetarium was planned since 2019, but due to COVID and other changes of plan, we finally arrived June 2023 to open our doors to the public.
So what will people see there? I mean, I know that planetariums are all about the stars and the planets and so on, but each one has a different approach. What's yours?
Let's talk first about our mission. What's our mission? Our mission is to combine the education of astronomy and space science with entertainment for Cypriots or tourists or people that they live in Cyprus, and that they would be actively involved in the adventure of exploring the universe. Our project actually consists on the idea of we can entertain people by educate them, and we can educate people by entertain them. So in our premises, we have a big dome where people can see, live in the space, a movie, and on the same time we have a telescope and a solar scope, an observation center actually, where we can see the stars during night time. We can see the solar, the sea during daytime, and we have a lot of VR gaming machines and VR educational machines where we provide education and entertainment with them.
Now, I don't think astronomy is something that features in our education system particularly, but I think you are hoping to get schools visiting.
Yeah, that's our major target, let's say. But again, you will be surprised how many astronomy lovers there are in Cyprus. There is a club where they are actively involved, around 5,000 members in this club. And we do have a collaboration with Interstellar. I don't know organization that they deal with the space science in Cyprus. So with their assistance, we are planning to approach universities, schools, or other organizations that they deal with astronomy.
So it's up in Damassos and Orinis, which I know in the past has hosted telescopes on dark nights to look at stars. Did you choose that location because it is sort of in the middle of nowhere? And of course, with light pollution everywhere these days, it's very difficult for people in cities to appreciate the stars.
Yeah, that's correct. That's one of the reasons that we choose the location. And the area, it's not far away from major cities like Nicosia or even from Limassol, half an hour drive. It's not so long. But again, the light pollution was a major thing we chose this location.
And so if people go there, I mean, I know you've got cafeterias and stuff like that, but how long would they need to have a look at all the things you've got to offer?
Listen, a good journey, because this is how we call it, a good journey in our premises will take them around 3 to 4 hours. Don't forget that we have a lovely restaurant to pass their time with nice buffets during weekends, and also a cafeteria where they can get a grab-and-go snack or a coffee while waiting. So 4 hours, I could say, they will have something to do during these 4 hours.
And the telescope, I presume you've got to sort of queue up for that because only 1 or 2 people can look at a time, can't they?
Yes, through the telescope, yes, but we are planning to organize special event nights. Actually, we have many phenomena that we can see them from our sky, from Cyprus. But some phenomena, we're going to organize some scientific event nights in our premises. So we will call people to come and enjoy the viewing of our telescope, and on the same time give them a sort of learning on this phenomenon that they will watch.
You've got a website. Tell us where people can find more details.
Yeah, we have a website. I mean, you can Google us. It's Cyprus Planetarium, of course. And inside, people can see our calendar, our astronomical calendar, our events calendar, and they can choose as well whether they would like to visit us on a day or a weekend. And they can also pick up their ticket, buying, and not wait in the queue here.
And so how much does it cost to get in?
The cost to get in to see a show, a dome show, let's say, it's €9 for adults, €7 for kids.
That is Christos Triandafilidis, the CEO of the newly opened planetarium at Damassos and Orinis in Cyprus. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.